So, after years and years of waiting, it's finally here. CD Projekt Red's most anticipated game, Cyberpunk 2077. And the question on everyone's mind is, have they knocked it out of the park yet again? In some ways, yes. The story and characters of Cyberpunk is much better than The Witcher 3, but the gameplay? That's debatable. Even without all the bugs and glitches, Cyberpunk's gameplay can be downright boring at times, and even on the hardest difficulty can be relatively easy. The perk system is boring and not interesting, and the stealth is in complete shambles. The side quests are interesting, but some of them leave a lot to be desired. Cyberpunk is fun, but it is marred by a lot of problems that can't be fixed by simply patching in updates. And don't even want to go into CD Projekt's deception when it comes to the games running on last-gen consoles. That will be saved for the inevitable Cyberpunk review. But do you know what game did improve with updates and DLCs? That's right, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Yes, we are back here yet again to talk about CD Projekt Red's fantasy RPG. After I finished my hour and 15 minute critique of the base game of The Witcher 3, I knew that I needed to do a separate video on the DLCs. And I knew if I tried to include them in my other video, then it would be going on for 2 hours. And nobody wants to listen to me ramble on about The Witcher 3 for the length of a feature film. But it's more digestible in 2 videos. My first video covered the entire main plot of The Witcher 3, as well as side content and my thoughts on CD Projekt as a company. And this video is going to be working off that one. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll link it in the description so you can go watch that one, then come back to this. Think of this video more of a companion piece of sorts. So without further ado, this is part 2 of my critique of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and its DLCs.
Wolves asleep amidst the trees.
At the end of the last video, I concluded that while The Witcher 3 is a pretty good RPG, it has some really major flaws that bring it down considerably. From the pretty awful combat to the non-existent upgrade system that makes you switch out swords and armor like it's nothing. There is some terrible stuff in The Witcher 3 that was simply never added to the game but was added by the modding community later on. My biggest gripe with The Witcher 3 was its main story. The Witcher 3 starts very strong, but ends up falling flat with uninteresting missions and last-minute surprises in the narrative to make sure the story made sense. A lot of CD Projekt's strong writing came through in the Bloody Baron questline, as well as a lot of the side content. I wanted more of that stuff in the main game, but luckily both expansions give us some of that amazing writing that shows that CD Projekt learned from The Witcher 3's failures. The most considerable change was the fact that Geralt feels like the main protagonist in both of these expansions. Part of my problem with the main Witcher 3 narrative is that it feels like there is more interesting story happening behind the scenes with Ciri's adventures through space and time and trying to avoid the Wild Hunt. She has a proper hero's journey throughout the story, while Geralt feels like exactly the same person from start to finish with no real growth in the character. Luckily, Hearts of Stone doesn't do this. Geralt's involvement with the story makes sense, and he's drawn into it completely of his free will. Well, mostly. We'll get to that in a bit. I feel like Hearts of Stone tells a better story off the bat because it doesn't have to adhere to the predetermined storyline of the previous 2 titles and the books before that. It uses characters from those stories, but it can put them in more interesting situations. There's no end-of-the-world scenario here, that's been and gone. Instead it can focus on the 3 characters of the story, Geralt, Gauntled Dim, and Olgierd von Everec. And that's where our story starts. Geralt is given a new monster contract to fulfill, something about a large beast in the Oxavert sewers. So Geralt goes to Olgierd von Everec to get more details on exactly what the beast is. The DLC starts off as business as usual, Geralt on the hunt for a monster to make some coin, but instead he's unwillingly pulled into a mystery involving magical wishes, princes and armies from another land, and taking a ghost to a wedding. It's one of the most interesting quests that CD Projekt has ever developed. And even better is the fact that it takes around 10 hours to complete, which is incredible when you realise that Blood and Wine, The Witcher 3's final expansion, is about 20 hours of content. Hearts of Stone doesn't even have a new area to explore like Blood and Wine does either, but its story is so captivating that you will barely register that you've been playing the game for 10 hours at all. It's why I think I love the expansions of The Witcher 3 more than I do of the main experience. There's no real busy work to do. Every quest you goes on feels unique and completely different from anything else you did in the main game. Hearts of Stone also explores more deeply the characters in the DLC. In the original game, you obviously spent a lot of time with Geralt, but as I said before, he doesn't really change throughout the game. You as the player understand who Geralt is as a person, and you choose who you want him to be. Instead of focusing on Geralt, the DLC instead focuses on Von Everec, a man who by all intents and purposes seems like your run-of-the-mill bandit, but it quickly becomes apparent that he has a long and often tragic life, one mostly filled with a lot of bad decisions and a lot of death. And all that pain and suffering made him do one thing: make a deal with the devil. That's right, the devil. The devil in the Witcher universe takes the form of a smiling man, and he calls himself Gaunter O'Dim. If you watch my original Witcher 3 video, or have played The Witcher 3, then you would know that you actually meet O'Dim all the way back at the beginning of the main game in the sunny land of White Orchard. He was the person that told Geralt where to find Yennefer. It seems like Geralt was always fated to run into O'Dim again. CD Projekt obviously had the Heart of Stone DLC worked out by then, and knew that he was going to play a vital role in the coming story. But Geralt doesn't meet the Man of Mirrors right away. Firstly, he must deal with the monster in the Oxenfurt sewers. So you travel to Oxenfurt and make your way down into the dark, twisting, and absolutely disgusting sewers. And instead of finding a monster, you find...
Shani?
Geralt?
What are you doing here?
Trying to save his life. Help me!
Shani, calm down. He's dead.
I'm sure something can be done.
Let it go.
Damn it! All for nothing.
You did all you could.
Shani is an old friend of Geralt's from all the way back in the first Witcher game. She's also a medic, and came down into the sewers with a small platoon of Redanian soldiers to kill the beast that was plaguing the sewers, but the beast slaughtered all the soldiers and Shani only barely escaped with her life. To absolutely no one's surprise, Shani and Geralt have a history together, and throughout the DLC you can romance her, but if the player decides to pursue that relationship, Shani turns Geralt down. In my original video, I discussed at length how the women of The Witcher 3 seemed all to flock to Geralt, that he could pick any of them to romance the player wanted him to, and how these women, who were ultimately the most powerful sorcerers in the entire world, had eyes for only one man: Geralt. And I had a problem with that. I felt this made the game lean more towards a straight male power fantasy than anything else. And the country of Poland, where both The Witcher was written and the CD Projekt are based, had maybe a little way to go when it comes to female representation in video games. And I still feel that way, even though I feel like the female characters in Cyberpunk are handled way better than they are in The Witcher 3. I feel like these are important matters to discuss in the world of video games and should be talked about a lot more. People tend to forget that Gamergate wasn't that long ago, but the internet has a short memory. It's important to remember these things and to grow from them, move away from it so everyone can feel represented in the media that they consume. So it's interesting when Shani turns Geralt down. No matter what you say, she simply doesn't see a future with Geralt. She wants someone who she can come home to every day and know that they will be there. Geralt won't be able to only do that because of his profession, but it's just the way he is. He's a wanderer, and even if he settled down, would have to be in a place that he could still enjoy the things he likes to do, hunting monsters, exploring and such. Geralt can't fundamentally live a normal life, it's just not possible. Shani helps Geralt track the beast to its lair, but that is as far as she'll go. It's time for Geralt to get to work, and that work involves getting knee-deep in the waste of Oxenfurt, setting a trap and waiting for it to arrive. And arrive it does, and it's a massive toad that is the absolute worst thing to fight if you're not ready for it. The first time I fought this thing, I died so many times to its attacks that I actually gave up on The Witcher 3 and came back to it months later. I feel like this entire boss battle highlights the worst aspects of the combat in The Witcher 3. There's no way that you can get through this entire fight without being knocked on your ass 20,000 times by its tongue attack. It has more ground pounds than a Destiny boss has when the boss is being ganked by 4 guardians, with falling guillotines spinning around like a bunch of bloody Beyblades. I tried that tactic on the toad and it doesn't work. But once you get the hang of the toad's moves and can avoid its attacks for long enough, you can eventually kill him. And as soon as you do, the toad turns into a person, and that person turns out to be a prince from Ophir. And just as Geralt realizes this, an Ophiri mage and an Ophiri guard show up and knock him unconscious. Geralt was tricked. Olgierd hadn't told him that the toad was a prince, and in the end it gets Geralt captured. Geralt awakens in the holding pen of a ship. and it's here that Geralt finally meets Gaunter O'Dim face to face. This is where we learn exactly what this DLC is going to be about. It's unveiled that Olgierd made some sort of deal with O'Dim. O'Dim will give Olgierd 3 wishes, but he must take something from Olgierd in return. O'Dim says that he will help Geralt escape the ship, but only if he helps him give Olgierd his 3 wishes. Of course, Geralt accepts, and the ship is suddenly buffeted by a great storm, sinking the ship into the depths of the ocean. Geralt wakes up on the beach near Oxenfurt, being dragged by an Ophiri guard. Geralt dispatches a few of the guards and escapes his bindings. This next part is a mini boss battle against the guards and the Ophiri mage, but you can simply run away, because the fight is a tough one. The mage shoots up huge amounts of sand in a magical explosion that takes down quite a bit of your health. If you get too close to him, he will simply teleport away. You can use these explosions to kill his guards by luring them behind you, then waiting for him to cast a spell. Funnily enough, this is one of the only times the Ophiri show up the rest of the DLC. This is the only time you actually come into physical combat with them, and that's a real bummer. We only ever see the European medieval inspiration come out in The Witcher 3, but the small amount we do see of the Ophiri makes it seem much more interesting in comparison. I know this DLC is focusing on 2 characters, but it would have been so interesting to put the player in a land completely different from the base Witcher 3. A land where Geralt can't understand the language, but needs to make do with translators and such to communicate. You could do so much more with interesting creatures and really dig into the real life mythology of Middle Eastern monsters and legends. There's a moment in Witcher 3 where you go to a desert-like planet and it's so vast and the creatures are so interesting to fight. That's the sort of place I hope CD Projekt takes the Witcher franchise next, but I digress. Geralt then returns to Olgierd and you begin to start to fulfill his 3 wishes. Firstly, he wants Geralt to go show his now long dead brother the time of his life, which ends up letting the brother take control of Geralt at a wedding with Shani. The second wish, Geralt must somehow get Maximilian Basodi's house. Basodi is a very rich and powerful man who runs the Oxenfurt auction house. Geralt enters into an auction he is holding and confronts Basodi, but he kicks Geralt out before Geralt could explain why he was there. This eventually leads you to come into contact with the Stranger, who lets Geralt in on a plan to sneak into Basodi's house and rob him. A heist, in other words. It's a hell of an intriguing setup for a mission. Most of Witcher 3's missions has Geralt working either by himself or with 1 or 2 other people, and stealth is very rarely a thing Witcher does best. So it's interesting when you get to decide who you want to come along on the heist with you. Do you pick the dwarf, who's an expert in explosives, or the master safecracker who can get you in quietly? This decision actually affects how that heist will play out in subtle ways. Sadly though, you don't get a choice on which acrobat you hire for the job. If you go with Hoff, you actually find him dead in a river, so you end up going with Eveline the elf. The heist, of course, doesn't go off without a hitch, in which the Oxenfurt guards will be called and Geralt with his allies will end up taking hostages. But you do end up getting to the vault, but so does Basodi. It's unveiled that the Stranger is actually Basodi's brother, Iward Basodi, who Maximilian had practically cut ties with after Iward started spending all of their inheritance on booze and women. This wasn't just a simple heist for the Stranger. This was revenge for years and years of pain and suffering, and no matter who you side with, Iward will end up bashing Maximilian's head in. You end up escaping with the house, which is a large safe box in the shape of a house which actually holds the will of both brothers' father and the documents for the estate. Funnily enough, you can simply agree to give you the documents and just take the house back to Olgierd. Olgierd will comment that the box by itself is worthless, but this was exactly what he wished for and nothing else. As heists go in video games, the one in Hearts of Stone is a lot of fun. I feel like it stands out more in The Witcher because there isn't a mission quite like it, and almost feels like something out of Assassin's Creed rather than a Witcher game, and the Stranger even dresses and acts like an assassin. But Geralt succeeds in his mission, and Olgierd gives him his 3rd and final wish. For Geralt to bring him the rose he gave his wife the last day he saw her. It seems like an impossible task, but Olgierd seems to think it possible or thinks Geralt will spend eternity looking for it. So you head off to Olgierd's estate to find the rose, but instead Geralt finds more than he bargained for. I said in my original Witcher 3 video that I think the Bloody Baron questline is the best quest in the entirety of The Witcher 3, and one of the best in RPGs across the board. But the quest to find the rose gives that questline a run for its money. You end up at the Olgierd estate, and after running into some men trying to rob the joint, you finally come across the caretaker, an abomination of a creature who you find out later was under orders to protect Olgierd's wife Iris from danger while he was gone. You end up fighting the caretaker, and it's a grueling fight, but it's only an appetizer for the amount of boss battles you're going to have throughout this DLC. Once you dispatch the caretaker, Geralt has two ghostly figures appear to him in the shape of a dog and a cat. They were there to keep Iris company while Olgierd was away. They actually help you throughout the quest, giving you hints at what actually happened at the manor. When you make your way inside, you're confronted with some kind of wraith, and as you explore the manor, it constantly throws furniture and bits and pieces against the walls, trying to scare Geralt like it's some crappy haunted house. In the end, you confront the wraith in a hallway, in which it traps Geralt inside so you can't escape. After dealing with the wraith, you come across the dead body of Iris von Everec, dead in her bed. After passing away, her body obviously wasn't buried, so she became the wraith of von Everec Manor. With the help of the two animal spirits, Geralt buries her in her favourite spot in the manor, beside the easel she used to paint on. But Geralt still needs to find the rose, so he summons Iris back so he can talk to her. Instead, she beckons to the canvas sitting on the easel, which now has a painting of the manor back when Iris was alive. Iris beckons for Geralt to enter the painting, and so Geralt is transported to the Land of Paintings. The Land of Paintings might be one of the most interesting and unique aspects of the entire DLC. The rest of this quest is spent going around a completely painted version of the manor and its grounds and slowly putting together scenes of Iris and Olgierd's life, and how his heart slowly turned to stone and he eventually left her. Putting the scenes together is probably the worst aspect about this whole experience. We have to pick up objects and put them in the right place to make the scene continue, but I understand the need to add some gameplay elements to the quest, otherwise it would just be 20 minutes of people talking. But it's such a sad story. Olgierd had wished to be rich and for him and Iris to be immortal for the rest of their lives, but the side effect was Olgierd's heart turning to stone. He no longer loved Iris, but she still loved him, and tried to convince him to come around. But even she has a breaking point, and eventually divorced him. But Olgierd was having none of it, and kills her father when he comes to take his daughter away. So Olgierd left, never to return to Iris ever again, only giving her a rose to remember him by, but trapping her in the manor forever. Geralt sees all of this, and you eventually meet the real Iris. She thanks the Witcher for finally burying her body, but she doesn't know if she should give the rose to him or not. If she gives the rose to Geralt, she'll have nothing else tying her to this world, and she will travel to whatever comes after. But she's terrified of this, that there is nothing but a dark void beyond what we consider life. In one of the most human moments I've seen in Geralt throughout the entire game, when Iris asks him what lies beyond for her, he simply says, "I don't know." I chose in both my playthroughs to take the rose, to release Iris from her suffering, but you can leave her there and not take the rose, leave her to a fate that she doesn't deserve, but a fate that she knows and understands. Geralt says to Iris just before he leaves, "I'll remember you, Iris von Everec," and Iris responds, "That no longer matters. Farewell." After Geralt takes the rose, he starts walking back to the painting, giving one last look up at Iris on the balcony, alone, as the painting starts to fall away into a shining light. Iris von Everec takes her last trip to the clearing at the end of the path, and is gone forever. I'm going to pause here and talk about the brand new rune system implemented in the Hearts of Stone, because it does impact the gameplay in some way. Just to get started with the rune rite, it's going to cost you an upfront of 5,000 gold coins, which is a lot of money. But if you want to get the best runes, you have to pay upwards of 10,000 crowns. So it's a lot out of pocket. And is it worth it? Well, that depends. These runes can only be fitted on specific armor and weapons. So you can get a rune that makes arrows deflect off your armor, so you no longer need to worry about that. Or you can have your stamina regen by 25% if you kill an enemy. These things are useful for people halfway through the game and haven't beaten the main Witcher 3 storyline yet. But an end game player, it's pretty much useless. For a player that has the best gear already, there's really no point in spending all this money on something that is literally going to be useless in the next DLC. And once you get those runes attached to those armor and weapons, you can't get them removed. When I first heard about the rune rite, I thought it was going to be something we would be able to enhance our gameplay completely with. But instead, it basically is a really expensive gimmick that alters the game only slightly. Not even enough to make a difference, and that's disappointing. I was expecting more, but I got less. So let's jump back into the story, shall we? Geralt goes in search of Olgierd in the local inn in Oxenfurt, but instead he finds Gordra O'Dim, who congratulates Geralt on completing the 3 impossible tasks, but tells him that his task isn't over yet. He simply needs to bring Olgierd to the Temple of Levani. But before he does, you get the choice to go see Shani one last time. When you go see Shani, she tells Geralt that she knows a professor that might know more about Olgierd and the deal he made with Gordra O'Dim. You can actually skip this step completely if you want. It's entirely optional. But if you do, you won't get what is considered the best ending to the story. When you finally find the professor, he tells Geralt all about his dealings with Gordra O'Dim and warns Geralt that O'Dim will try everything in his power to get his way, and to defeat him, Geralt must challenge him to a game of wits. And the prize should be the one thing O'Dim cares about above all else: a person's soul. So that's exactly what you do. When O'Dim confronts Olgierd at the temple, he tells him his time is up, that the contract has been fulfilled and it's time to take Von Everic's soul. Olgierd exclaims that the deal was 3 wishes and O'Dim could have his soul when the 2 of them are standing on the moon. And O'Dim tells Olgierd that the 2 of them are standing on the moon, and waves the dust away that's covering the floor. The floor is actually an intricate mosaic of a half moon. Olgierd has been tricked. Here's where you get a choice. You can either leave Olgierd to his fate, or try and stop O'Dim from taking his soul. If you decide that Olgierd deserves his fate, you get to choose what you get as a reward. One of the items, a bottomless bottle of wine, is literally useless as Geralt can't use it, so the better option is to protect Olgierd. Geralt challenges O'Dim to a battle of wits, and says that if Geralt loses, then O'Dim can take both his and Olgierd's soul. But if he wins, then O'Dim has to leave them both alone. O'Dim accepts, and Geralt is teleported to a weird upside-down world full of demons and random twisting paths. O'Dim tells Geralt a riddle. I'll play that for you now.
The riddle. Let me hear it.
To all things and men I appertain, and yet by some am shunned and disdained. Fondle me and ogle me till you're insane, but no blow can harm me, cause me pain. Children delight in me, elders take fright, fair maids rejoice and spin. Cry and I weep, yawn and I sleep, smile and I shall grin.
What was that supposed to be?
You tell me, what am I?
All you need to simply do is find O'Dim somewhere in this hell world, but there is a time limit, and O'Dim will taunt Geralt as you run through it. The first time I played this, I almost ran out of time. The game doesn't tell you where to go and what to do at all, so I followed the number one basic rule of what every video game uses to tell a player where to go: light. I simply followed the light to the manor in the distance. Once you get through the manor, you drop down into an open area that's full of mirrors. Of course, mirror is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear O'Dim's riddle. Considering it's called the Manor Mirrors, it seems the most likely option. But he's actually talking about reflection. So instead of running around the maze trying to find the right mirror O'Dim is hiding in, you simply have to walk up to the large fountain sitting near the far wall and use the Ard sign against it to blow in the wall at the back that is holding in the water. I really like the way the game handles this final boss battle. It isn't a normal battle where you're simply attacking and working at a boss's moves like you were with Eredin in the final boss battle in The Witcher 3's ending. Instead, you legitimately have to work out the riddle and figure out what exactly O'Dim was saying. It gives me a real Riddles in the Dark vibe from The Hobbit, where Bilbo had to riddle Gollum for his life. Once you work it out, Geralt banishes O'Dim and sends him on his way, but not before O'Dim gives his signature grin to Geralt. You never quite find out who or what O'Dim is. Is he the devil incarnate? Is he some sort of wraith or god? You're never quite sure. Olgierd is thankful nonetheless, and he's no longer immortal and can finally live a normal life. He gives his saber, named Iris, to Geralt for saving his life. Geralt keeps his promise. For as long as he and the player use the sword, we will always remember Iris von Everec. Olgierd is a horrible man who made some really bad calls and ruined a lot of people's lives. He no longer has a heart of stone, but it's up to him if he continues down that path or lives a new life. There's hope for redemption there, under the surface, and surely that's enough. If Iris von Everec believes he can change for the better, then who are we to disagree with her? Hearts of Stone is an absolutely incredible expansion for The Witcher 3. It takes the best parts of the campaign and turns it on its head, but it still feels like The Witcher 3. I can't really think of any higher praise than that. From the characters, to the quests, to the interwoven stories that make it feel like a real addition to what you played before. Some RPGs in the past have added small little DLCs for a price, and have called it an expansion, like this one. While CD Projekt also has added smaller DLCs, they made them all bloody free. So when they released Hearts of Stone, you knew full well that it was an expansion, not just some shitty horse armor. And I honestly think they set the standard for story expansions going forward. You can see inspiration in games like AC Odyssey, where expansions are huge stories that don't just feel one and done, they make you sit and think about it after. And goddamn, that's incredibly high praise, but I honestly believe it. What I hadn't considered though, was that Hearts of Stone was the warm-up for CD Projekt's best work to date, Blood and Wine.
Wolves asleep amidst the trees.
When I first started Blood and Wine all those years ago, I honestly wasn't ready to absolutely fall in love with it. While I love The Witcher 3 and Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine holds a very special place in my heart because it's exactly what I wanted out of a Witcher expansion. A gripping story, amazingly written characters that are on par with some fantasy characters you might see in the works of Tolkien or Brandon Sanderson, and a fantasy world absolutely dripping with life and colour that is something like straight out of a children's fairy tale. Everything in Blood and Wine is larger than life. I said in my original video that the White Orchard section of the base Witcher 3 was like something out of a fairy tale, but Toussaint is just magical. Just look at it. There are times where I'll just stand still and look back at the city and the castle and just look at it in awe. It's like a painting, for God's sake. And the beginning of Blood and Wine is equally as captivating. Geralt is introduced to two Knights of Toussaint, who are in Velen to try and find Geralt, for a monster has gripped their homeland and is murdering people left, right and centre. They were sent by the Duchess, Anna Henrietta herself, so Geralt of course can't refuse. When you first come to Toussaint, you witness a knight being attacked by a giant, and Geralt springs into action to help the knights bring the beast down. When I say the beginning of Blood and Wine goes by in a blur, I'm not lying, but it's all so much fun. In the first 2 hours of gameplay, you end up fighting at least 3 separate bosses that all take a bit of time to fight if you're playing on normal or harder difficulties. I'm going to start off by talking about the actual world of Toussaint, because it is really different from the doom and gloom of Velen and even Skellige in the base game. In Toussaint, the war never really came to its borders, so the land isn't ravaged by both war and plagues and the hunger that comes from those events. Plus, Toussaint is absolutely rich, like exceedingly rich. The entire land makes its money off of, you guessed it, wine. Its rolling hillsides are full of vineyards and manors and huge castles. That isn't to say everyone is rich, you only have to go to the bottom of the city streets to see that, but everyone seems happy. That, with a combination of bright sunny days that Toussaint always seems to have, probably adds to that. Everything in Toussaint is to the extreme though. It really is a fairy tale land like out of a Disney movie. Its knights are virtuous and full of honour, and will often pursue dangerous adventures more suited to a witcher like Geralt just to impress their beloved, or to say they did an honourable deed. So quite a lot of side quests you come across are about some knight wanting to achieve glory by killing some monster, but they don't know how to do it. So Geralt has to step in and save the day. Speaking of side quests, Blood and Wine has some of the best side quests in the entirety of The Witcher 3. The first one I mention is the Mastercraft Witcher armor sets, in which a master armorer in the city sends Geralt out to find the diagrams so he can craft them. Each armor set has a specific quest and location for you to explore and discover. The only downside to the quest is the price of the armor. If you don't have a certain materials to craft it, then you can buy the materials from the armorer for an exceedingly high price. One of the materials even costs over 4,000 crowns a piece, plus the 5,000 crowns you have to pay for the chest armor. The rest of the armor is cheap cheaper, but only by a smaller amount. I ended up crafting all the armor pieces, but I continuously wear the Mastercrafted woven armor set. It's considered the best in the game. This does fix a major problem the original game had. Each piece of fancy Witcher armor you crafted in the main game couldn't be all upgraded. So when I originally made my Mastercrafted woven armor in my first playthrough, I couldn't simply upgrade it on my New Game Plus playthrough. It became obsolete within the first hour of gameplay. I'd spent a lot of time and money getting that armor, and instead I had to replace it with crappy knight's armor. That was my biggest complaint to The Witcher 3. Nothing special you had could be upgraded so you could use it in the end game content. Bottom line, of course, fixes that with a Mastercrafted armor. You better be prepared to throw it away though if you want to go through the game again on New Game Plus mode. One of the other quests is a story basically taken directly from the tale of King Arthur. The quest takes you to a mysterious island in the middle of a large lake, and in the middle of that island, a smaller lake with some kind of monk meditating on a rock in its centre. But, much to both Geralt's and the player's surprise, you can walk on top of the water. When approaching the monk, he begins to tell Geralt how virtuous, or non-virtuous, his deeds have been over the course of the DLC. If you've been kind, caring and selfless and ready to put others before yourself, then the monk will ask you to fight him for a reward. But if you were horrible to people, and the Geralt that you're playing didn't help anyone, it was only in it for the money or the rewards, then the monk will send you off to prove that Geralt is in fact virtuous at heart. It's an interesting side quest that judges you on your choices throughout the DLC. I don't see many people having to do the challenges to prove themselves. By now you should know who Geralt is as a person. I've always felt that he would try and push against what society thinks of him, a monster with no emotions, but instead show compassion to others. He's still the hardened Witcher we all know and love, but he will help others where he can. Once you fight the monk and defeat him in an intense fight, he slowly walks into the water. And suddenly, a woman's voice will tell Geralt he is worthy, and a sword comes out of the lake just like the tale of King Arthur. The literal Lady of the Lake hands Geralt the most powerful sword in the game, capable of explosive damage when it charges up though. It even glows like a weapon that you would get in Assassin's Creed or something. I love this quest. It's quick and simple, but also has an added layer of depth to it by the monk judging you. The last quest I want to talk about is named Extreme Cosplay. It's a short quest, but it's purely my favourite one because of the challenge it represents. Basically, Geralt comes across some kind of merchant trying to help a bloodied knight who upon further inspection appears to be dead, but his armour is an antique, not something a real knight would wear into battle. You and the merchant follow the blood trail up to the mansion on the hill. Inside the grounds, you find a massacre. Bodies lay all over the place, as well as what appears to be some sort of setup for a play. In the garden lining the path, what appears to be a line of elven warrior statues. They are extremely creepy. You find a survivor hidden away in the house, and he tells you that he and his friends are part of a club that did historical reenactments of major events. And this one so happened to be a major elven event in which the last elven ruler of Toussaint handed over the rule to his conqueror, King Ludovic. After they had finished the reenactments, some sort of demon had come to life and killed all the reenactors. So Geralt, the merchant, and the survivor all reenact the scene so Geralt can defeat whatever demon comes to life. It turns out that it was no demon, but the elven statues were actually golems that the survivor had brought weeks prior to the event. The statues were actually meant to be used all those hundreds of years ago against King Ludovic as a trap for him. So now Geralt needs to deal with 2 elven mages and some elven spearmen, and I can tell you it's an absolute hell of a fight. Firstly, the 2 mages will attack you with a lightning spell that will leave you immobilized for a second and take down a quarter of your health. That gives the spearman enough time to stab you and then you're dead. There's absolutely no way to be ready for this fight, not even a shield will help you. So the only thing left to do is run. You can run up the stairs towards the house because the elves won't follow you up there, so that's your safe spot. The first thing to do is take out the mages, so you can lure them around the side of the house and kill them quickly and then escape up the stairs if you get surrounded. It took me a long time to figure out how to kill these enemies, and that's why I love this mission so much. CD Projekt really didn't have to make these enemies so hard to defeat, but they did, and it's completely unexpected. By now you've faced huge monsters that could crush you in a single step, or knock your head off with a giant hammer, or tear you to pieces with huge claws, but none of them compare to these elves. I've scoured many Witcher 3 forums talking about them, and the general consensus seems to be that this fight right here is the hardest in the entire game, and that's what's so surprising, but I love it. The main quest, however, focuses mostly on Geralt trying to find out enough about this so-called monster attacking people in Toussaint. The monster actually turns out to be a vampire, a master vampire in fact. And you end up fighting him about 2 hours into the DLC after he commits another murder at a festival. It's a tough fight as well. I remember when I first fought the vampire in my first playthrough, I ended up having to tone it down to easy difficulty just to defeat him. His strikes are so fast and so random that it's sometimes impossible to deflect all his blows. It does a ton of damage as well. If you're prepared though, and have vampire oil on your sword, you can kill him in a few hits rather than constantly dying like I did. The fight is still brutal, however, and it wears Geralt out completely. But just as the vampire is about to strike Geralt down, another vampire jumps in front of him, and the Master Vampire's hand goes straight through this random vampire. This is Regis, who is actually an old friend of Geralt's, but he is also friends with the vampire that Geralt is hunting, so the contract becomes a bit more complicated. Regis reveals that the other vampire is called Detlef, and Regis and him have both had a powerful bond together. Detlef saved Regis a long time ago and healed him until he was strong again, something Detlef didn't have to do. Regis explains that Detlef wouldn't just go around killing innocent people, and there had to be a reason why he was doing this. This is why I love Blood and Wine's main questline more than The Witcher 3's main story. Blood and Wine has you trying to solve a simple mystery, but it gets more and more complicated as it goes along. The Witcher 3 questline is your simple hero saves the world story, but instead of actually being that hero, you sort of just sit on the sidelines and watch it happen. In Blood and Wine, Geralt is always in on the action, no matter what. Your decisions are also taken into account more seriously than the main Witcher 3 quest, where your decisions throughout the entire DLC will have lasting consequences to how the DLC ends. CD Projekt seems to have quite a problem with making role-playing games where your decisions don't matter until either the very end of the game or the specific dialogue options you need to pick to get the ending you want. The main Witcher 3 story did it with how you treated Ciri in 2 quests before the final fight, and in their newest game, Cyberpunk 2077, none of your choices mattered at all until the final quest. But in Blood and Wine, you can get a different ending depending on what you did and didn't do, more like a traditional RPG would. I did run into some problems at the end of the game, however. After finding out that Detlef is being manipulated by some unforeseen party that has taken his lover captive, and will not release her until all the murders have been committed, the mysterious group has a vested interest in seeing these certain people killed. Geralt and Regis find out that these men that were being murdered by Detlef all stood for the 5 defining virtues that the Knight of Toussaint stands for. You keep putting the puzzle pieces together throughout the story. You find wine on one of the notes that the mysterious group sent to Detlef that sends you on a wild goose chase after a stolen barrel of wine that only the Duchess herself is usually allowed to drink. And you end up recruiting the help of both a shoe shiner in Beauclair and a rich woman who definitely isn't a vampire called Oriana. Through all your sleuthing and detective work, you finally piece together that Detlef's lover is hidden away in a castle and can be rescued. But upon rescuing her, Geralt realises that Detlef's lover is actually Sienna Henrietta, the sister to the Duchess of Toussaint. She was the one that had been manipulating Detlef to get back at her sister, and the people that had exiled her from Toussaint. After Detlef tells Sienna that she has 3 days to come to him alone and explain why she did all of this, why she manipulated him. Of course, this is impossible, because Sienna gets thrown into prison as soon as you arrive back at Beauclair. Anna confronts Geralt on not being able to kill the beast. Before she can decide what to do with her sister, Detlef unleashes his army of vampires and vampire spawn into the city. The people are in a panic as you set out to help the knights and soldiers being swarmed by the spawn. But it's here where you decide the fate of both Detlef, but also Sienna and Anna, the Duchess. You can either go release Sienna from prison and let her meet with Detlef, or you can try and find a way to kill him yourself. It shows the player as a real moral dilemma. Do you sacrifice Sienna, who definitely is going to be killed by Detlef betraying him so you can save the city, or do you kill Detlef, put him down like the monster everyone says he is? It's a hard decision to make. You could say Sienna is the real monster, manipulating Detlef like she did just for revenge, but Detlef did kill those men, then unleash his army into the city so more people could die. If I'm being honest, I don't like any of the endings you can pick in Blood and Wine. They're stronger than The Witcher 3's endings, but you can't get the ending where everyone lives, where Detlef is sent off as a free man and Sienna and Anna reunite as sisters, not enemies. I picked the kill Detlef option in this playthrough, which is the wrong thing to do, of course. In that ending, you need to summon him to a place so you can fight him, so that requires going to an elder vampire's lair and persuading the vampire to summon Detlef for you. This option eventually leads to both the death of Detlef, also the deaths of Sienna and Anna. In my first playthrough, I instead went to find Damien. Anna's personal guard is in the city while it's being attacked by the vampire spawn. This will lead you on a lengthy adventure where you eventually end up in a literal fairyland where you're looking for Sienna. The fairyland is even more bizarre than Descent was when compared to the base Witcher 3. I said in my original Witcher 3 video that both Sapkowski and CD Projekt drew on old Polish fairy tales as inspiration for a lot of monsters and quests when making up the Witcher stories, but the fairyland is the most blatant use of modern fairy tales that everyone around the world would know. We have a Little Red Riding Hood, the Big Bad Wolf, Jack and the Beanstalk, Rapunzel. They're all there in their own twisted Witcher way, and it's absolutely brilliant. All the characters in Fairyland have all been there for so long that they've all grown all twisted and deranged. As soon as you find Sienna, you're immediately attacked by the Wicked Witch, who threatens to put Geralt into a stew. The entire section of the game is all tongue-in-cheek, but it does show some of the weaknesses of CD Projekt's storytelling. This entire section is all about potentially saving Sienna from a terrible fate, that either being murdered at the hands of Detlef or trying to assassinate her sister and being killed for that as well. But there's no trying to get through to Detlef at all. Regis says at one point that Detlef's actions were based purely on his instinct, that he seems more animal-like than a human, but the entire DLC is focused around the morality of a person. What makes them a monster? Is it being a literal monster with fangs and claws? Or is it manipulating someone to do what you want for a grudge? Why is it that there is no way to let Detlef go at the end of the DLC without sending Regis into exile? We've seen in The Witcher 3 that there are such things as a happy ending. Other games have dealt with how your actions can affect your life later on, and if what you thought was the right choice for you might not be the same for someone else. But in a game where literally everything can be fixed by some sort of magic, how can you not save everyone and have that happy ending? It does seem more realistic that not everyone lives at the end of Blood and Wine though. But even now, I can't honestly say who is the worst monster, Detlef or Sienna. Detlef is cast aside and ripped apart, while Sienna is given a second chance because her sister is the Duchess of an entire country. Sienna's entire life was hell-bent on revenge against her sister. She let that fuel her, and she never stopped to think about the other options, that murdering her sister was the worst possible thing she could do. There's something to say here about how the privileged are let off the hook, while those that were being used and labelled as monsters are cast aside. You would think that Geralt would have a problem with this, being someone who has been labelled as a mutant his entire life. But he doesn't, and goes along with all the medals and congratulations afterward, as if he just did the same thing to a person that other people do to him. If you help Sienna, Anna will ask for her sister's forgiveness, and instead of stabbing her with her sister's hair clip, Sienna will embrace Anna, and it will be happy ever after for everyone. As I said before, Detlef gets the short end of the stick. You have to go fight him and kill him. This boss fight might be even more difficult than the boss fight of The Witcher 3. Detlef has two stages. The first one, he'll fly around and try to swipe at you or try and launch a flurry of crows at you. The crows will almost kill you instantly, so you need to avoid them as much as possible. The second phase takes place in what I guess is inside Detlef. You basically need to run around the room and chop apart these sack things that will hurt him. Destroying 3 of them will end the fight. The thing is, I died about 4 times in this fight, and each time the game takes you back to the beginning of the fight, not when Detlef transforms into his master vampire form. So every time you need to sit through this entire cutscene over and over and over again every time you die. It's not as if CD Projekt didn't know this was a problem either. After the initial cutscene of Regis confronting Detlef, there's a small area for you to save your game and apply oils to your weapons and whatnot. They knew this cutscene was too long, but they still didn't give you a checkpoint halfway through the fight, and it sucks. After you finish the main story, that isn't the end. I want to quickly focus before we wrap it all up on Corvo de Blanco, the vineyard that Geralt inherits at the beginning of the DLC. Corvo Bianco works very similar to the Assassin's Creed 2's Villa, where you can purchase upgrades that actually actively helps the player in the long run. You can model the entire house and gardens, taking it from being run down to livable. You can get weapon and armor stands to show off all the gear you've been hoarding, because you couldn't bring yourself to throw it away even though it's worthless. Adding a new bed gives you more vitality, and upgrading Roach's stable will give him a stamina boost. But all of this is pretty pricey. I have about 16,000 crowns at the end of the DLC, and I spent all of it on the upgrades. Is it worth it? Maybe. But it does feel more like home if you do. Corvo Bianco becomes Geralt's home. There's a small cutscene where you're talking to Regis about what Geralt is going to do now. Is he going to continue on the Witcher's path, taking contracts and travelling? Or is he going to hang up his swords and live the good life? I always felt that Toussaint is where Geralt should end up. that he should finally hang up his swords and take it easy. After not only saving countless people's lives throughout the years, after drudging through the mud and the muck hunting monsters, after all the political BS, and having to save the world, shouldn't a Witcher deserve some rest? I think Geralt does. Upon returning to Corvo Bianco, you find that a stranger has set up their stuff in the middle of the villa. That stranger turns out to be Yennefer. She's come all this way to spend time with Geralt, to live out their lives in a land that is absolutely beautiful, and I think that's absolutely perfect for them. We don't really have an afterword for Blood and Wine. After speaking to Yen, you basically get free roam to do things in either Toussaint or head back to Valen or Skellige. But surprisingly, CD Projekt did provide an afterword in the 10th anniversary of the Witcher video they put up in 2017. It's really an emotional video, especially for people that have played the games for so long. And even for me, as someone who only played The Witcher 3 exclusively, it really is a special video. We see the whole cast there, from Ciri to Triss to Lambert and Anna, and even the goddamn Baron is there. Then Geralt says this.
Things are good here, you know? I'm good. We play Gwent, drink wine, swipe grapes from Anarietta's vineyards the odd moonlit night. Vesemir'd enjoy that especially. Been through hell and high water, you and me. Fact is, you know me better than anyone else does. Actually, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Thanks for everything. And know we all miss you, old friend. So, might be my birthday, but I say, here's to you. Now, tell us how you're doing.
It's such a wonderful nod of the heads the players that have stuck around as fans for all of these years. While I don't like the way the fans still hold up CD Projekt as the best company ever, even though that might not be the case anymore after the whole cyberpunk business, I still believe they deserve a lot of praise for what they did with not only Blood and Wine, but Hearts of Stone as well. Both these DLCs make the base game so much better than it actually is. In my Witcher 3 critique, I was really negative about a lot of aspects of the game, and I still stand by those opinions. Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone still run into those problems, but the locations, characters, quests, and stories make it so damn enjoyable in these DLCs that I can't help but fall in love with it. Honestly, Blood and Wine is the best DLC I have ever played for any video game, period. It likes to make fun of itself a lot, like the game is breathing a sigh of relief that it doesn't have to stick to a serious story anymore, that it can go out and be as weird and different as it wants to be. This DLC is CD Projekt at their best. It is a triumph of a DLC and everyone should play it. I also feel like this whole playthrough for me has been a goodbye to The Witcher 3. After putting in hundreds of hours, not only because I enjoy playing it, but also for this critique, the end of Blood and Wine hit me harder than I had previously realised. The moment when Geralt knowingly looks at the screen and completely breaks the fourth wall had me choking back tears. I know that I'll never come back to The Witcher 3. My journey with Geralt is at an end, but I'm happy with this ending. Not many games will give the player a satisfactory ending where you feel like the characters got exactly what they wanted. Most other RPGs will either have the main character die, looking at you Mass Effect 3, or be sucked into some sort of portal or vortex where they can never be seen or heard of again. Blood and Wine gives the player and Geralt exactly what they want, and that's perfect. Thanks for watching.
Many great and weighty events. After all that toil, I believe we deserve a bit of a rest.
That we do.